Night was heavy over Del Rio when Tommy Lynn Sells arrived home. The air was filled with an ominous tension that had settled over the city like a dark veil. He had barely opened the door when he found himself facing the unbridled wrath of an angry Jessica. Her eyes flashed with anger. Her voice trembled with suppressed emotion. "Where have you been?" she snapped. "You've been disappearing in my van for days. You missed work, and we desperately need money for the house." Sells felt his stomach clench. He knew he was in trouble, but he had no answers that would satisfy Jessica. In a desperate attempt to defuse the situation, they drove to the Pico convenience store. The store's neon lights cast an eerie glow on the empty streets. Sells tried to contact Bill Hughes on the payphone to collect his last paycheck. The metallic ring of the phone echoed through the night, but no one answered. Hands sweating, Sells entered the store to get a pack of cigarettes. His heart leapt when he saw Terry Harris. The two men talked for about 5 minutes, their hushed voices blending with the monotonous hum of the freezers. Back at home, the situation escalated. A heated argument broke out, and Sells fled the house to escape Jessica's blazing wrath. The darkness of the night seemed to swallow him as he wandered aimlessly through the streets. Finally, he found refuge in Larry's lakefront tavern. The smell of stale beer and cigarette smoke hung heavy in the air. Sells ordered a Jim Beam and Coke, and struck up a conversation with barmaid Noel Hushin. Her eyes widened in discomfort as Sells became more and more pushy. "You're a real nuisance tonight," Noel muttered, trying to be polite. But Sells didn't let up. "How about sex?" he asked abruptly. Noel froze. "No thanks," she said firmly. But Sells didn't give up. He asked her where she lived. He asked her for sex again. When she mentioned that her car was broken, he offered to pay for the repairs, if she would sleep with him. Noel's discomfort grew by the minute. Finally, in a desperate attempt to convince her, Sells lied. "I own Amigo Auto Sales. You can have any car on the lot if you sleep with me." The truth was different. Sells had actually told Noel that he worked at Amigo Auto. He claimed he wasn't interested in her himself, but told her that the owner, Bill Hughes, was a horny old son of a bitch. "If she blinks her eyes properly, he'll help her," Sells had said, a sly grin on his face. The hours passed, and the atmosphere in the bar grew more and more oppressive. At one point, Sells took a drink break and left the bar to change his shorts for a pair of pants. As he emptied the pockets of his shorts, he realized with a touch of panic that when he took out the change, he must have stolen someone else's money. Heart-pounding, he returned to the tavern. The few remaining customers gave him suspicious looks. Sells realized that the money belonged to Sonny, a friend and neighbor of his at the American campground. Hands shaking, he handed it back and sat down to drink another Jim Beam and Coke. Guilt gnawed at him, but he tried to numb it with alcohol. He was one of the last 2 customers to leave the bar after it closed at 2 in the morning. The night air was cool on his heated skin as he staggered home. On his way home, Sells stopped near the flea market. His eyes fell on a refrigerator outside an elderly woman's house. Without thinking, he reached in and pulled out some venison and a beer. As he ate, a dark thought began to form in his mind. He decided to go to Terry Harris's house and get the money he felt he was owed. Later, after his arrest, Sells would insist that he had advanced cocaine to Terry Harris and promised him $5,000. But no evidence would be found to support this claim. The truth lay in the dark, hidden behind a veil of lies and manipulation. As Sells left the property, the woman's son, who was visiting his mother for the holidays, stopped outside the house. Sells' heart raced as he slunk away. He stopped at his trailer and grabbed one of his long-bladed knives that was lying outside. The cold metal blade felt heavy in his hand. Jessica didn't notice his presence as he disappeared like a shadow in the night. 8 slipped away. Sells drove Jessica's van east on Route 90 toward Del Rio. The road lay lonely and deserted before him, only the faint moonlight illuminating his path. Just before he reached Lake Amistad, he turned left and drove through the stone arch to Guajira Bay. After a left and right turn, the road went downhill before climbing to the houses on the hill. Sells parked the van at the lowest point and walked the rest of the way. His heart pounded in his chest as he approached the house. He moved as quietly as a four-legged predator on the hunt, but it wasn't quiet enough for the Harris's dog. Sells had to stop and pet him before he could break into the trailer. The silence of the night was broken only by the dog's soft panting and Sells's shallow breathing. What happened in the next few hours would change many people's lives forever. Sells broke into the trailer, brutally murdered Katie Harris, and slit Krystal Surles' throat. The air was filled with the metallic smell of blood and the muffled screams of his victims. Downstairs in the hallway, a noise woke Justin up. He didn't know what he'd heard, but he blithely got up and went to the bathroom. Sells came out in the living room and went to the back door. Justin's alarm was set to keep him from wetting the bed. He chose that moment to make his disgusting alarm sound. Sells crept down the hallway, turned off the alarm, and left the trailer through the back door. Justin returned to his room, still unaware of the intruder's presence. He assumed one of his sisters had turned off the alarm and went back to sleep, unaware of the horror that had taken place just a few feet away. Sells took his bloody knife with him as he left the house. He stopped outside to collect the 2 screens he had removed from the windows earlier and continued down Route 90 to the lake. On the bridge, he threw the screens as far as he could and listened until they splashed into the water. The soft splash was the only sound in the silent night. At home, he washed the blood from his hands, stripped off his clothes, and crawled into his huge waterbed. He begged Jessica to hold him. She wrapped her arms around his body and held him until he fell asleep, unaware of the horrific acts her husband had committed that night. He woke up at noon, and Jessica was already up and gone. He arranged to sell his truck, but would have to wait until Monday when the credit union opened to get the money. He decided he had one more thing to do before he left town. He had to get revenge on Frances Cusack, a lawyer and public defender who had angered him. He had recently met her son in a bar and had gone to Frances's house with him. He had monopolized the phone all evening until she told him she had to make a call. Her behavior deeply offended Sells. He planned to kill her on Sunday night. The thought of revenge made his blood boil. His future sorted, he went to the house of the friend he had met in the bar the night before. They drank whiskey and beer and shot up cocaine. The drugs made Sells's mind race as the world around him blurred. At one point he staggered home from Sonny's bar, but an angry Jessica threw his clean clothes into the garden and told him not to come back until he sobered up. She slammed the door in his face and locked it. Sells returned to Sonny's house, anger and frustration seething inside him. After Sells was with Sonny, the sheriff set up surveillance on the trailer where Sells lived. Not wanting to alert him to their presence until they had a search warrant, they stayed across the street. Ironically, Sells was not at his house, but at Sonny's, on the same side of the street where the officer had been guarding him. The tension in the air was palpable as investigators waited, clueless. Sells was busy answering the phone. He made several threatening calls to his mother-in-law, Virginia Blanco. She reported these messages to the sheriff's department. When officers asked if they should step in and take Sells away, Pope said, "Take the mother-in-law to a motel. Don't park her car there, Just take her to a motel. Make sure her car isn't near the motel. Then she'll be safe. Forget about it and just keep looking at the trailer." The hours passed agonizingly slowly. Many hours later, he returned. Although he was still under the influence of drugs and alcohol, Jessica unlocked the door and let him in. The tension between them was palpable. Shortly after Sells got home, a deputy called Pope urgently. "Someone screamed in the trailer. We want in," he reported excitedly. "No, no, no. Did you hear a scream?" Pope asked, alarmed. "Only one," the deputy replied. "Well, one of two things happened," Pope said thoughtfully. "Someone stubbed their toe and screamed, or someone slit someone's throat. In which case, you're too late. If you hear any more screaming, you can go inside. Just watch. Watch the trailer." Oblivious to the apprehension outside, Sells went to bed and slept until authorities arrived with a felony warrant. The calm before the storm was over, and Sells's world would soon be thrown off track forever. After Sells was arrested at the Val Verde Correctional Center, he sat down with Lieutenant Larry Pope and Texas Ranger Johnny Allen while the video camera rolled. The red recording light seemed to be trained on Sells like a menacing eye. When the little red light came on, Sells's tough demeanor softened noticeably, as if he was dropping a mask. Pope stated that the date and time was January 2nd, 2000 at 8:06 and 46 seconds. "Okay, let's introduce ourselves here. I'm Larry Pope, lieutenant with the Val Verde Sheriff's Department, Criminal Investigation Division," he began in a calm, professional voice. "My name is Allen, John Allen of the Texas Rangers, stationed here in Del Rio," the other man added, his eyes fixed on Sells as if he wanted to see into his soul. "And I'm Tommy Sells," the suspect said, with a mixture of defiance and resignation in his voice. "You arrested me for a murder we just discussed." "You have already been read your rights once this evening, and I would like to take this opportunity to read them to you again," Pope began. The tension in the room was palpable. "I understand that, and have waived all of my rights," Sells interrupted, as if to hasten the inevitable. "Well, let me read it to you," Pope said, continuing the usual recitation. His voice echoed through the sparse interrogation room. Sells seemed distracted, fiddling with the watch strap on his arm. His fingers trembled slightly, betraying the tension he was trying to hide. Pope warned him in a serious voice. "If there is something you don't want to talk about, you shouldn't lie about it. You should just say, 'I don't want to talk about it.' That is your right. I advise you that if you lie about it and it gets out, you will only look bad." "I understand," Sells replied quietly, his eyes on the floor. The preliminary hearings were over. The questioning and the officially recorded confession began. The atmosphere in the room became even more oppressive, as if the walls were closing in. "Tommy, you have been arrested for the murder of—" Pope said, but Sells abruptly interrupted him. "I don't know," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "You don't know her first name? You know her nickname? What she's called? You don't know who she is? You know she's the Harris girl?" Pope asked, his voice a mixture of disbelief and impatience. "Yes," Sells replied shortly. "Terry Harris's first girl?" Pope clarified, his eyes boring into Sells. "Right," Sells confirmed, his gaze still averted. "We know her as Kathleen, or Kathy," Pope began, but Allen interrupted him. "Kayleen," the ranger corrected. "Kayleen, excuse me, or Katie, and there was another girl. You were arrested for attempted murder of her too. Do you know the girl's name or something?" Pope asked, his voice growing more urgent. "No," Sells replied, making direct eye contact for the first time. His eyes were empty, as if he was trying to suppress any emotion. Pope and Alan established the identity of the second girl as Krystal Surles, and confirmed that Sells was ready to talk about the incident. The tension in the room was rising with every second. Sells suddenly said, "I wanted to take out a lawyer today. I wanted to kill a lawyer." His words hung heavy in the air, shocking in their casualness. "What lawyer?" asked Alan, clearly alarmed. "Lives across the street," answered Sells monotonously. "From the campground?" asked Alan. "Yes, across the street from the campground," confirmed Sells. "For what?" asked Alan, his voice a mixture of curiosity and horror. "Well, I think," began Sells, but Pope interrupted him. "When did you want to kill him?" asked the lieutenant sharply. "You," clarified Sells, a hint of irritation in his voice. "You," corrected Pope. "Just how can I explain this so it makes sense? She stepped on my foot somewhere and I didn't like it. I wanted revenge on her," Sells explained, as if he were talking about something mundane. After a pause while cigarettes were lit and the microphone volume was adjusted, Pope continued, "I think we agreed to start with Terry Harris on the evening of December 30th, 1999, somewhere in Del Rio." Okay," Sells agreed, his voice suddenly uncertain. "Tell me, who all was there and where did you meet?" Pope asked, his voice calm but firm. "We met at Pico's station. I think it's Pico's station. It's—" Sells began hesitantly. Alan interjected, "Maybe it's Shamrock or something." "It's right by Ram Country. My wife and I were there. I bought a pack of cigarettes." Terry stopped. "Terry and I went in. I stopped to make a phone call. That's why I was there," Sells explained, his words coming faster now. Terry and I went in for a little bit, less than 5 minutes. We talked for less than 5 minutes. We came back out and he told me he was going to Kansas. I asked him when he was going to pay me my money. He said his buddy had hit a deer with his car, and he was going to Kansas to get his truck or something." "Did he owe you money?" Alan asked, his eyebrows raised. "Yes," Sells replied curtly. "So, how much money did he owe you?" Alan probed. "Less than $5,000, Sells said, a hint of unease in his voice. "Why would he owe you that?" Alan continued. "Cocaine," Sells said after a moment's hesitation. "Coke?" Pope asked, surprise in his voice. "Yeah, I guess Coca-Cola advanced me the money, and I advanced him the money. He's never paid since," Sells explained, his voice a mixture of sarcasm and bitterness. "That's $5,000 worth of cocaine at once, or how did that accumulate over time?" Pope asked, his voice betraying skepticism. "No, it was just once," Sells replied. "Once?" Alan asked. "You gave him $5,000 worth at once?" "Actually, I owed $3,000 for it and charged him $5," Sells admitted, a hint of pride in his voice. "Okay," Alan said slowly. "I had to make some money for myself," Sells added, as if justifying himself. "Yeah, I know a little about the business," Alan replied dryly. "How long ago was that?" "Oh, 2 months ago," Sells said hesitantly. 2 months ago?" Alan repeated incredulously. "Yeah, more or less," Sells confirmed, shrugging and leaning forward, elbows on his knees. The tension in the room was palpable as investigators tried to sort out the truth from Sells's conflicting statements. The questioning continued, each answer from Sells raising new questions. Investigators dug deeper, determined to uncover the truth behind the gruesome murder of Kayleen Harris and the attack on Krystal Surles. With each passing minute, a grim picture of Sells's actions was revealed, making those present shudder. Pope continued, his voice calm but urgent. Okay. And what was your general opinion? What did you think? Did he care? Did he want to pay you something or something? What was your opinion? Sells shook his head, his eyes blank. I didn't notice it at the time. I didn't notice it. Well, did it upset you or something? Pope asked, his eyes searching for every emotion on Sells's face. I didn't think much about it, Sells replied monotone. Okay, Pope admitted, a hint of frustration in his voice. To tell you the truth, I don't remember. I said, see you later. Sells added, his words sounding almost inconsequential. Okay, Pope repeated, his tone betraying that he had expected more. And my wife and I kept walking, and while we were there, we got into an argument, and I went to the bar and got drunk. And when I left the bar, I went to the flea market up there just above the campground, Sells continued, his voice becoming more animated as he recounted the night's events. Pope nodded in understanding. Yeah, the one down there in the hole. Yeah. Where does the road go all the way down? I stopped there and ate some deer meat or something they had in the refrigerator. And then it was like a bell rang in my head. It was like it said, "This is what you can do," Sells explained, his eyes taking on a strange gleam. What do you mean? Alan asked, his voice showing concern. What do you mean when you say, "This is what I can do"? Go to Terry. I didn't go there to kill. I didn't go there to rape. I didn't go there. I'm just saying, go down there. It wasn't intentional, you know. It's like the girl in Kentucky, you know. I didn't do it intentionally. It just happened. And I went through the window where the little blind boy used to sleep. He said, Sells's words came faster now, as if he was reliving the events. Pope interrupted him. Let's go back first. You were talking earlier about, the gun you took. Well, it wasn't my choice. It was what I had with me, Sells replied, a hint of defensiveness in his voice. When you left your house, did you take anything with you when you left your house? Alan asked, his voice calm but firm. Yes, the knife, Sells admitted. And it was... Alan left the sentence unfinished. Sells raised his hands to demonstrate the length of the knife. The gesture made those present shudder. About that long. Handle and blade and everything? Alan asked. Yes. Okay, Alan said. A little over 12 inches. What kind of blade did it have? A thin, long one, with a little point, Sells described, his fingers tracing the shape in the air. So you eat deer meat and say, "This is what I can do." So where did you go? What happened? Alan pressed, his voice betraying a mixture of curiosity and horror. So, I'm going down to Terry's house. I'm fooling around with the dog outside for a bit, and then I'm going to figure out how to get into the trailer. I'm so drunk, Sells said, smiling. The ease with which he spoke about that fateful night made the blood run cold in investigators' veins. I'm surprised I didn't wake up half of Del Rio. I'm so drunk. It's like a blur. I finally found a way to get into the trailer. How did you get in? Alan asked, his voice strained. I tried to break down the back door first, but I was too drunk. I messed that up, Sells confessed. His body language relaxed, his tone almost joking. It was as if he was describing a harmless high school prank, not the beginning of a gruesome crime. I couldn't get in there, and then I tried a window off the living room near the back of the trailer. Couldn't get in, and as I was walking around to get out, I noticed an open window. That's where the water tank was. Back? Front? What? Alan asked. The nervousness in his voice reflected his growing unease. Front, Sells replied. He responded to Alan's tone and sat up straighter in his seat. "I was wondering if you knew whose window that was," Alan pressed. "I didn't know that at the time. When I got in, I did. It was the little blind boy," Sells explained, his voice calmer now. "Whose room was it?" Alan asked again, his voice betraying his tension. "Your little boy, the blind little boy," Sells repeated. "Okay, so that's where the water tank is?" Alan continued. "Yes." "How did you get through that window?" "It was open. I took the screen off, but the window was open," Sells explained, as if he were discussing something mundane. "Okay. I got in and went to—" Sells began, but Alan interrupted him. "Did the little boy say anything when you got in?" he asked, his voice a mixture of curiosity and concern. "Yes, yes. I woke him up when I climbed in. He said, 'I wish you all would stop coming into my room.' And I walked out of the room and stood up," Sells recalled. The casualness with which he described these details sent chills through those present. "So, do you think he thought maybe his sisters were in there?" Alan asked, trying to understand the situation. "Yes." "You don't think he thought it was you?" "No," Sells shook his head. "Okay, you leave the room, and where do you go?" Alan continued the questioning. "To the dining room. There's the dining room, the kitchen, and the living room. I stood in that room for a couple of minutes thinking, what the hell am I doing here? And now it's like you're at the point where you're totally pumped up, you know? It's bad circumstances. I thought about doing them all," Sells confessed. His words hung heavy in the air, filled with the foreboding of the horror that was to follow. He described his exploration of the bedrooms while nervously fiddling with his fingers. "I know it seems kind of bizarre that there's no plan. It was spontaneous," he said. He recounted that he then thought about raping the mother, but was too drunk to act on it. When his description reached Kayleen's bedroom, Pope asked, "Was that the first time you cut or stabbed her?" "I stabbed her in the arm, I think. She started to say something, and I plunged the knife into her and said, 'Shut up.' And she made some kind of comment like, 'You didn't have to cut me.' And I said, 'Shut the fuck up.' And she told the little girl to get her mother," Sells explained. The gruesome details froze the air in the room. "Does the little girl know you?" Alan asked. "Has she seen you before?" "Yes, yes. Not the one on the top bunk, I think." "But the one standing next to the bed?" "Yes." "Okay," Alan replied. "And I cut her to shut her up," Sells added. The coldness in his voice sent shivers down the spines of everyone present. "Where did you cut her next time?" Pope asked. "In the stomach," Sells interjected, as casually as if someone else were naming their preferred dressing for their salad. "With a lot of force." "The damn knife was so sharp you didn't have to use much force." "No, sir. I would have cut off her fingers and pissed off. But if I did, I didn't do it on purpose. I just cut her throat," Sells explained. The indifference in his voice was a frightening contrast to the brutality of his words. "Well, there are a lot of rumors about everything," Alan explained. "Now you said you cut her throat. Was she facing you? Was she away from you? Do you remember anything? If you're not sure about something, you're not sure. I understand that a lot of things happened quickly." "I just reached out and shh," Sells said, his face devoid of any emotion except boredom. "That's how sharp that knife was." "Which hand would you have had the knife in?" Alan asked. "I think it was this one," he said, flicking the corresponding wrist. "The right hand?" "Yes." "She's standing in front of you?" When you and I looked at each other, I took the knife, and it was done. And she fell, and I—" Sells's words came faster now, as if he were reliving the scene. "She got stuck?" Pope interjected. "No, I had to cut a little more until I was sure it was all the way through. Then it was a done deal," Sells explained with terrifying precision. "Was there a lot of fighting in the area?" Pope asked. "No. Not really. Fine. Okay. As long as that's the best you remember. And the little girl in the top bunk was petrified, and I dropped the first one and walked out of the room. Then I went back to the top bunk and just whistled," he said, making a slashing motion with his hand. "And I thought I killed her." The gruesome details sent chills through investigators, but they pressed on, determined to uncover the full truth. With each revelation, the extent of Sells's crimes became clearer, a grim picture of violence and indifference unfolding before their eyes. Alan continued the questioning, his voice calm but firm. "She's in the top bunk. Did you reach up, jump up, or crawl onto the bed?" "No, it was easy. I just reached over," Sells explained, as if he were discussing an everyday action. "How was she laying there? How was she in bed?" asked Alan, trying to imagine the horrific scene. "I think she was on her back," Sells answered after a moment's hesitation. "Just don't move. Petrified with fear?" Alan asked. "Yes." "Did she say anything?" Alan continued, his voice a mixture of horror and professional curiosity. "Not a word. She didn't scream. She didn't do anything." "Nothing," Sells replied, his voice shockingly emotionless. "I'm sorry I caused you all so much trouble." The officers assured him they were just doing their jobs. Then they questioned him about what happened after he left Kayleen's room. "I left the room. I went to the back door," Sells said, his voice sounding tired now. "Did you close the door or leave it open?" Pope asked. "I don't know." "Did you still have the knife in your hand?" "Yes," Sells said. Then he added, "I still have the knife. Well, in a roundabout way, I know where it is. I don't know why I didn't throw it in the lake. But as I was leaving, I just walked through the house, and I think I went back into her mother's room for a brief moment. And I was like, just get out of here, you know? I think I panicked. And then I just walked out the back door." They said, "I don't know why I didn't throw the knife in the lake," Alan said. "Did you throw anything else in the lake?" "When I went out the back door, I took the screens off. I grabbed the back one and went back to the front. I don't think you found any of my fingerprints out there. Maybe, but I doubt it. I was pretty careful," Sells explained, a hint of pride in his voice. "Did you make sure not to touch anything, or did you wipe it off?" Alan asked, his eyes narrowing. "Wipe them off?" After Pope and Alan had teased out all sorts of details about the disposal of the screens, Alan asked, "You said you were in the van?" "Yes." "Which van is that?" In response, Sells's face showed the first sign of real concern during the confession. "My wife's van. That's all she has. Please don't take it away from her," he pleaded, real emotion in his voice for the first time. "Back up for a minute, Tommy," Alan said. "What reason would there have been to cut open the girl's underwear?" "Just to make it look like that," Sells answered hesitantly. "What does it look like?" "Like a rape scene or something. I don't know how—" Sells's voice trailed off. Alan interrupted. "Was there ever an attempt at sexual assault?" he asked sharply. "No," Sells insisted. "I didn't touch her or anything. I'm telling you, I did it, right? That's how it happened. I didn't try to screw her or anything. I didn't." "It's like I told you," Pope said. "I just want the truth. If you hear any part of it you don't want to answer, just say, 'I don't want to answer that.'" "I'm telling you, I don't mind. I'm glad it's over," Sells replied, a strange look of relief crossing his face. Why are you glad it's over? Alan asked, his voice a mixture of curiosity and disgust. Hurting people is not good, Sells replied quietly. Do you think, Tommy, you would have continued? Alan asked, his eyes boring into Sells. I know without a doubt I would not have stopped, Sells confessed, his voice barely above a whisper. Early in the afternoon of January 2nd, Pope, Alan, and Sells went to the Harris home to videotape a tour of the crime scene. Alan operated the camera. Pope conducted the questioning. They began at the spot where Sells had parked the van that night. They walked up the path he had taken to the trailer. Sells circled the house, showing them the door he had tried to break open, the window he had tried to open, and where he had actually gotten into the house. He crawled back in through the window and casually visited the scene of the carnage. He repeated all his movements through the house and into Kayleen's bedroom. She tried to come here, he said, stopping at the spot next to the bedroom door. And I stabbed her, right here somewhere. He walked to the foot of the bunk bed and said, I stabbed her here, and she kind of jumped back, and I slashed her right here like this. He casually demonstrated how to cut across the girl's throat with a knife blade. She fell right here, he said, bending down to the floor. And I think I reached down there and did it again. He walked to the side of the top bunk. And this little girl up here, and I went over her and did this. His hand made a tiny flick of the wrist over where Krystal's neck had been that night. This girl just fell? There was no more struggle or anything? Pope asked. Because I look in this room and I see blood here, here, and here. As he pointed to the blood, Alan scanned the area with the camera. Is there any more movement? Pope continued. I know you may not remember everything, but do you know how any of that blood could have gotten into the room? Maybe when the little girl got up. Right here. He walked to the foot of the bunk bed and pointed to the floor. Was the main conflict. And I went over here. He returned to the side of the bed and cut this one open. Then I got a little nervous. Before officers and Sells returned to the Valverde Correctional Center, they stopped at the Valverde Regional Medical Center and took blood samples for forensic testing. Lieutenant Pope had videotaped a confession and a walkthrough of the crime scene. The prosecutor wanted more. He also demanded a written confession. In that session with Sells, Pope asked, Tommy, did you take a souvenir or anything? No, I never take anything, Sells replied. With that denial, there was no evidence of grand theft, as the family could not identify any items missing from their home, except for the 2 screen doors. Pope typed the confession with standard wording establishing Sells' identity and a list of his constitutional rights. Sells initialed each of these rights and signed each page. In this confession, a statement was made that differed from his video recordings. Sells said, I touched her between the legs, and I touched her breast. The comment did not resonate at all with the sleep-deprived investigator at the time. The next morning, however, Pope could not forget it. He had the prisoner brought from his cell to Pope's office and told him, Look, in the state of Texas, anything you tell me when you're under arrest cannot be used in court unless you write it down and sign it, or it is recorded in some other way. So, I want to ask you something. What did you mean when you said you touched her between the legs? Did you rub her? Did you put your fingers in her? What did you do? I put my finger in her, Sells admitted. Now I'm going to tell you something. In the state of Texas, that's rape. Rape and murder are followed by the death penalty. That means you get the death penalty. Sells looked at Pope, but said nothing. I want you to give me a statement that says, but I told you what it can. Well, it's the truth. Okay, I'll take it. Pope prepared the following statement, and Sells signed it on January 7th, 2000 at 17:04. The statement detailed Sells's actions that night, including the sexual assault of Kayleen Harris. It ended with the words, "I know that this statement can mean the death penalty for me. I don't want to die, but it's the truth, and I don't want to hurt anyone." And the confessions didn't stop. One murder after another came easily to him. Haley McHone, May 1999. When asked why he killed her, he said, "She was in the wrong place at the wrong time." The Dardine family, November 1987. When describing Eileen, he said, "She had a big belly." For some reason, he felt uncomfortable saying she was pregnant. Ina Court, July 1985. A forged document surfaced, and rumors circulated that a judge had paid for her murder because he was having an affair with her, and she was causing trouble. Mary B. Perez, April 1999. He sat on the floor of the toilet and demonstrated how he had strangled her. The list went on and on. Some of the statements were not so easy to verify. For example, in St. Louis in 1986, while working for Atlas Towing, Sells claimed that he received a call from a 25 to 30-year-old prostitute whose car had broken down. When he got to her broken-down vehicle, she had no money. Sells offered her a trade. She would have sex with him, and he would take care of her car. When she wasn't interested in the deal, he shot her and dumped her body in the river. During his time at the Val Verde Correction Center, which housed both the prison and all of the sheriff's department's offices, Pope and Sells often had conversations outside of official interrogations. In one conversation, Pope asked, "Tommy, I can understand how you kill those girls. You're stronger than them and all, but how do you kill those men without getting beaten up?" Sells was on his feet before Pope could close his lips. His hand shot out and drew a line across the lieutenant's throat. "Once you cut their throats," he said, "their hands are on their throats, and you don't have to worry about their hands anymore." The coldness in Sells's voice and the precision of his movements sent chills through Pope. He realized in that moment that he was dealing with a man who had elevated killing to an art form. Sheriff Dwayne Jernigan played a crucial role in keeping the confessions flowing. He spent hours in the cell with his prisoner, talking to him about his mental well-being. The atmosphere of these conversations was often oddly intimate, as if two old friends were chatting, not a sheriff and a suspected serial killer. Another prisoner, Jose Cervere, gave Sells a Bible, which he initially simply threw on the floor. Jernigan picked up the book and encouraged him to read Isaiah 55, verse 7. "Let the wicked forsake his way, and the evildoer his thoughts, and let him return to the Lord, and he will have mercy on him, and to our God, for he will abundantly pardon us." The words seemed to resonate in Sells's mind. To touch anything, even if he did not immediately show it. The sheriff returned to the cell regularly, often bringing a tin of snuff. He always greeted the prisoner with a handshake and a hug, a gesture that seemed almost surreal in its normality given the severity of Sells's crimes. When Cervere was taken to prison, he gave Sells a plant he had grown in his quarters. The sheriff's wife brought a second plant to decorate Sells's room. These small acts of humanity stood in stark contrast to the cruel acts Sells had confessed to. Finally, the religious exhortations of the sheriff, the neighbor, his wife, and his mother-in-law seemed to convince Sells that he had found the Lord. In an enclosed outdoor area, a prison chaplain baptized him in a large tub. The water splashed as Sells was submerged, and for a moment it seemed as though all his sins might be washed away. As soon as Terry Harris could arrange for Kayleen's body to be brought back to Kansas, the rest of the family followed. They lived with Krystal's mother for most of January. The atmosphere was filled with grief and pain, but also with the warmth of familial support. Krystal and Terry knew they had to get the kids back to school. They left the warm embrace of family very reluctantly, moving back to their home near Del Rio at the end of the month. Sleep was impossible in their old home. Every little nudge or whisper in the night sent the adrenaline levels in their blood soaring. The memories of that terrible night seemed to echo in the walls. During the day, Katie's presence echoed in every room. Her laughter, her smile, the memory of her footsteps on the floor. Everything seemed still there, yet unreachably far away. At work, Terry found his ability to concentrate was slipping, and the responsibilities of his usual job were now overwhelming him. The grief and pain of losing his daughter made it impossible for him to concentrate on everyday tasks. One afternoon, 2 weeks after their return, Terry called Krystal from his office. His voice trembled as he said, "I want to go home. Come home. We'll pack everything up and just go," Krystal replied without hesitation. She had understood without a word of explanation. The pain in Terry's voice was explanation enough. They moved back to Kansas on Terry's birthday, February 12th. It was a bittersweet new beginning, marked by hope for healing and grief over what they were leaving behind. When the body count reached 50 based on his confessions, Sells claimed he was only 70% done. Investigators looked at each other in disbelief, shocked at the idea of how many more victims there might be. Amidst all these confessions, Ranger Smith's curiosity was drawn to Sells's lifestyle. "Tommy, you go on all these little adventures. You have to eat. If you don't want to eat, you have to buy your dope. They won't give it to you. You won't work. How do you make money?" he asked, his voice a mixture of fascination and disgust. "Well, I can make $300 to $500 a day holding up a sign that says, 'Homeless. Please help. God bless you.' I can make even more if I had a wife and child with me," Sells said. His eyes glittered as he recounted his scams. He later elaborated on this scam in a letter. "I thought about some of the ways I made money as a homeless person. Was it a scam? I don't think so. Homeless people work for food. Please help. Or be in the spring vacation at any beach. Daytona is one of the nicest. Have a camera with just one step. Aim, push the button. Or wash windows." He added that homelessness is not a lifestyle he was forced into. It is one he prefers. Almost anywhere you put that sign up, you can quickly take 20 or so photos. You do it when traffic is at its heaviest, between the lights. Same with the windows. Just take a squeegee with you. And the camera thing is good any place. The beach, the riverfront. From California to New England, calls poured in to the Texas Rangers. After the calls, many came to speak to Sells in person about their cases. They listened with hope, relief, and horror as he recounted details. Within a short time, 13 murders were confirmed. Investigators worked feverishly to put together the puzzle pieces Sells provided them. Not all justice seekers found answers with Tommy Lynn Sells. On November 18, 1993, 9-year-old Angie Hausman was abducted from her home in O'Fallon, Missouri, near St. Louis. Her attacker had raped and tortured her and tied her to a tree, where she died of hypothermia. On April 2, 1996, an unidentified black teenage girl was found in a boxcar, wrapped in sheets, as the train pulled over at the Tropicana plant near Bradenton in Manatee County, Florida. She suffocated. But her tormentor was not Tommy Lynn Sells. At the time of both crimes, he was a guest in the West Virginia penitentiary. Sells told his interrogators that he had had a dream about the murders of Pamela Castaneda and her mother, Margaret McLean. The crime occurred on September 7, 1991, in Charleston, West Virginia. At first, it was thought possible that Sells was making an indirect confession with some leeway. The Del Rio District Attorney's Office had been nurturing this suspicion for some time. In fact, District Attorney Thomas Lee cited this case in a response to the defendant's motion in July before trial. It was one of the murders he cited as evidence of a crime or bad deed. Yet another man, Dana December Smith, is still behind bars for this crime. His DNA matched. San Francisco police wanted to know if Sells was responsible for the disappearance of 13-year-old Eileen Michaloff. She vanished without a trace while walking home from school on January 30, 1989. They could not establish a clear connection to the man behind bars in Texas. Then there was the case of 40-year-old Thomas Brose. He also worked at the fair. On April 15, 1998, his body was found in his mobile home at the Marina Motel on Roosevelt Avenue in South San Antonio. Based on an identification of Sells's picture by a landlord in the Rio Grande Valley, the victim's family believes that Brose had rented an apartment in Mercedes, Texas, for other fair employees, including Sells, and that Sells moved with the fair to San Antonio, where he shot Brose. However, San Antonio police did not consider Sells a suspect, and after initially agreeing with Brose's family that he was responsible for the murder, Sells recently said he had been in Del Rio all month, but Lieutenant Larry Pope was still skeptical. There's a lot of evidence that suggests he was. He said a lot of things that really fit together, but he said he didn't want to say anything about it because they, the state of Texas, would give the death penalty for it. Pope's eyes narrowed as he considered the possibility that Sells was hiding even more secrets. Looking for corroborating evidence for some of the others, it was time for Tommy Lynn Sells to take his confessional secrets on the road. In March, Rangers Allen and Smith arranged to visit Arkansas, Idaho, and Nevada. The tension was palpable as they embarked on this eerie journey into Sells' past. The Rangers, Sells, and two pilots flew out on the Department of Public Safety plane. The atmosphere on the plane was tense. Everyone was aware of the importance of this trip. Before they could go to the crime scenes, however, they had to make one more stop. During the annual inspection of the plane, a small oil leak had been discovered. The pilots had to stop in Oklahoma City, the closest place where they could find mechanics who could repair the plane. Her prisoner sat in the repair shop lounge. Two men with guns and a man in handcuffs made for an uncomfortable situation for everyone involved. The tension was palpable. Any distraction was a welcome change. They watched with unusual interest as the truck carrying coffee deliveries pulled into the parking lot. The woman at the wheel of the truck held their attention as she performed the mundane task of unloading the deliveries. They watched as she waved to the men who had helped her and jumped into the truck. Suddenly, the unexpected happened. All eyes were on her as she backed her vehicle and crashed into her plane. The sound of twisted metal filled the air. She struck a wing and bent the tip up so that it was pointing straight into the sky. In this minor rear-end collision, she caused a total of $25,000 to $30,000 in damage. The Rangers were now stranded before their journey had really begun. The irony of the situation was impossible to ignore. The pilots booked flights with Southwest Airlines and flew back to Austin. For the Rangers, it wasn't quite so simple. As Coy Smith put it, "To put a prisoner on a commercial flight while carrying a gun, I'd rather almost walk back to Texas." His words illustrated the complexity of their situation. Johnny Allen negotiated with the coffee company. Their insurance policies would cover most of the costs for the rest of the Rangers' scouting trip. The company would cover the rest. Oklahoma Executive Jet Charters was hired, and they flew to Arkansas. The trip could finally go ahead, albeit under unexpected circumstances. The Little Rock checkpoint initially seemed like a waste of time. Local authorities had no record of a murder in 1982 at the house Sells had pointed out, but when Lieutenant Terry Ward of the Little Rock Police Department contacted the homeowner to ask if he could recall any unusual occurrence, he could recall it. It had happened to his tenant, only he hadn't died. He fell to the ground and played dead as Sells pulled the trigger. Investigators exchanged meaningful glances. Here was possibly another piece of the puzzle in Sells's bloody past. Sells then led investigators and the 48 Hours crew along small country roads to the Blue Hole, where he allegedly left the body of a woman he had raped. The drive was filled with an eerie silence, broken only by the crunch of tires on the gravel. However, local authorities would not spend the necessary resources on an expensive underwater search to find her body. That was the end of the mystery. Her name is unknown. Her death is uncertain. The investigators' frustration was palpable. Another victim whose fate may never be revealed. The next stop was Twin Falls, Idaho. There, Sells led investigators to the scene of a murder that occurred in 1997. He confessed to raping and killing a long-haired blonde woman, dismembering her body with an axe and burying her on the banks of the Snake River. The chill in his voice as he recounted these gruesome details sent chills down the spines of everyone present. The Snake River, like its namesake, meanders through the canyon it has carved over time. It is a place of unbearable yet forbidding beauty. The crack it has carved is so deep that cameramen had to lean close to the edge to catch a glimpse of the descent to the canyon floor. Without hesitation, Sells led them to a well-hidden path leading down the canyon wall. His familiarity with the terrain was unsettling. He noticed that everything looked very different than it had before. As he pointed to the spot where he had buried his victim, there was a problem. 2 years earlier, there had been a massive landslide at this spot, pushing the burial site into the river itself. Any attempt at recovery would be difficult, if not impossible. Nature had erased the traces of Sells's crimes, but not the memories of them. Sells's memory of the woman who died there was so clear that a forensic artist was assigned to the case. Shirley Timmons, the same woman who had worked with Krystal Surles when she described her attacker, worked with Sells to create a likeness of the blonde. The collaboration between victim and perpetrator, mediated through art, was a surreal experience for all involved. He leaned across the table, looked her in the eye, and asked, "You were the one who painted the picture that got me caught, weren't you?" His voice was a mixture of admiration and accusation. "Yes, I am," Timmons replied calmly. "I didn't think it was that good," Sells said, with a hint of arrogance. For a moment, Timmons didn't answer. Then, mirroring Sells's body language, she said, "That was good enough to get you caught, wasn't it?" Her words hit Sells like a punch, his eyes widening briefly in surprise. When the sketch aired on America's Most Wanted, Lisa Mueller recognized her daughter, Yvette. In 1997, Yvette had gone to a supermarket to make a phone call. She never came back. Hope for answers that had been buried for so long was rekindled. There was a catch to this identification, however. Yvette Mueller was kidnapped in Las Vegas. Sells's memory placed the victim at a Twin Falls convenience store where he had also stolen a brown station wagon. He also thought the woman had hitchhiked from Canada to Salt Lake City. Authorities were able to confirm that a vehicle with that description had been stolen in the area around that time. They just didn't know how to fit Yvette into the puzzle. Everyone agreed that it was possible that she had been abducted and killed by Sells in the Las Vegas area, and that another woman had been killed outside of Twin Falls. It was also possible that both were the same woman. The complexity of Sells's crimes and the unreliability of his memories made the investigation a nightmare. On the murder cases, he was off by a couple of cities and by 2 or 3 years. But he's never been off by states, Ranger Smith said. He admitted, however, that given the number of murders Sells had committed and the amount of drugs he had abused, anything was possible. Investigators knew they might never know the full truth. The traveling investigative team then flew to Winnemucca, Nevada. In the police interview room, Sells sat with his back to the window wall. Across the table from him, the Rangers had a clear view of the room beyond the glass. It was filled with members of the Winnemucca Police Department, the County Sheriff's Department, and the FBI. The tension in the room was palpable as Sells began to tell his story. They listened as Sells described Stephanie Stroh's jewelry, her clothing, the bag she was carrying, where she had been and where she was going. With each revelation, their eyes bulged and they grinned. There were occasional high fives of celebration. They had got Sells on point, and they knew it. The investigators could barely contain their excitement. Here might be the breakthrough they had been waiting for. They made arrangements for him to lead them to the body. The tension rose as they prepared for this scary journey. Before leaving, the prisoner still had to be searched. Sells, already angry at the FBI's lack of respect, exploded when the prison guard accidentally or intentionally pulled his hair. Sells lunged at him and put his hands on his throat. The tall, muscular Texas Ranger Smith was immediately on Sells, overpowering the smaller man. The incident was a terrifying reminder of the violence that lurked inside Sells, always ready to erupt. When tempers had calmed down, the search for Stephanie's body began again. They drove past an abandoned building, unrecognizable in its utter disrepair. Sells correctly described it as a former rest stop. He led the crew to a deserted site in the desert. The vastness of the landscape seemed to swallow up any secrets Sells might have wanted to reveal. Sells said he deliberately led them to the wrong place because he was angry about his treatment in Winnemucca. The Rangers considered it possible that Sells had deliberately misled them, but were dismayed that the area was never thoroughly searched. The investigators' frustration was palpable. Once again, Sells seemed to be slipping through their fingers, his secrets firmly in their grasp. On that road trip, 4 bodies were searched for. Only one was found, and that one was still alive. The trip had raised more questions than it provided answers, a pattern that seemed to repeat itself again and again in the Tommy Lynn Sells investigation. A sullen Sells returned to Del Rio. The experience had visibly shaken him, but investigators were sure he still had many secrets. The hunt for the truth would continue, driven by a desire to see justice done for the victims and their families. On June 8th, Reba and Michael McHone filed suit against Tommy Lynn Sells in Fayette County District Court in Kentucky on behalf of the estate of their daughter Haley. The atmosphere in the courtroom was filled with grief and suppressed anger as the parents described their daughter. The suit described her as a vibrant teenager full of life and spirit, with shoulder-length blonde hair and beautiful green eyes. The image of the vibrant girl was in stark contrast to her tragic fate. Count 1 alleged that she was innocently playing on the swing when she was abducted, captured, kidnapped, wrongfully imprisoned, assaulted, tortured, mutilated, raped, and killed by Tommy Lynn Sells. The young teenager was subsequently humiliated, ridiculed, mocked, embarrassed, misrepresented, and slandered by the defendant. The words echoed through the courtroom, sending chills through those in attendance. They sought punitive damages for their pain and suffering, lost income potential, and funeral expenses. In addition, they sought damages to the parents for the loss of a child's love and affection. They argued that Sells hid the body because she knew it would cause panic and cause suffering to her parents and others. The insane defendant, on the information and belief available, had already killed 13 men and women since 1981, and was therefore aware of the acts or omissions that would aid and abet him in continuing his conduct in this matter. And he demonstrated a cruel, callous heart and inhumane qualities not exhibited by animals even in their various species. The prosecution painted a picture of Sells as a monster beyond all human compassion. No amount of damages was specified, but the parents' emotional demand was clear. They were seeking some form of justice for their lost daughter. Thomas C. Chupak, the court-appointed guardian ad litem for Sells, responded by requesting that the plaintiff's motion be denied and the plaintiff's motion dismissed because the plaintiff was incarcerated and pending trial in Texas, and because the plaintiff had not presented a case upon which relief could be granted. Sells filed a handwritten response with the court, explaining that he could not defend himself in Lexington, Kentucky, because of his situation in Texas. He also complained that he could not read his guardian's name on the document sent and did not know how to contact him. His response was a mixture of legal technicality and personal frustration. On June 25, 2000, Sells and Danny Calderon spoke through the holes in their doors in the neighboring cell at the Val Verde Correctional Center about religion and forgiveness. The conversation began innocently but soon took a dark turn. "It depresses me to be in prison," Danny confessed, his voice barely above a whisper. "Then you should just hang yourself," Sells said, his words cutting through the air like a knife. "If I did that, Tommy, God wouldn't forgive me," Calderon replied, audibly shaken by Sells's suggestion. "If you give your life to God, He forgives you. Period," Sells replied, with a conviction that was unsettling. "I don't believe that. You have to ask for forgiveness for everything you do wrong," Calderon insisted. "You stupid bastard! Where did you get that stupid idea from?" Sells's voice was now full of anger and contempt. "That's what the Bible says. And if you kill yourself, you're dead. You can't ask for forgiveness for that," Danny replied, his voice shaking slightly. "You're a punk. Get in your bunk," Sells ordered, his words dripping with menace. "You can't tell me what to do in my own cell," Calderon boldly objected. "Oh yeah? I'll make you my punk, and then I'll go kill you," Sells threatened, his voice now a dangerous growl. "You won't kill me, Tommy, but you should ask God for forgiveness for that statement," Calderon replied, his voice shaking with fear and determination. "I'll gouge out your eyes and kill you slowly. Just wait until they open that door." Sells's words hung in the air like a death sentence. No matter what Calderon said after that, Sells continued to rage. "I'm going to kill you." The threats echoed through the cell block, a chilling testament to the violence that lurked inside Sells. He was moved to another cell, away from Sells. However, no charges were filed, and no disciplinary action was taken. The incident remained a disturbing testament to Sells's continued dangerousness, even behind bars. Even after months of interviews, Allen and Smith were still enthusiastic about their prisoner. "Tommy is a petty thief and burglar," Smith explained. "He has some of the traits of Ted Bundy and Henry Lee Lucas. And to top it all off, he has the artistic talent of some of the country's biggest con artists, who defraud businesses and people of billions of dollars every year. All of that wrapped up in one man, one person. He can completely paralyze a small-town detective trying to solve a 15-year-old murder, and the guy walks out the door shaking his head. And he does it all because he says, 'I've got nothing better to do.' One day he might steal $30 from the cash register. The next day he might beat an entire family to death. and the day after that, he might be sitting here in Del Rio fixing your car's air conditioning. He's every criminal in one pretty human package. He represents a small part of society that I don't think many in law enforcement have ever recognized. He's a terrorist in society. He's out for prey, he's out for holdups and escapes, he's out for his own gratification and self-preservation. During those months, the Texas Rangers faced a dilemma. They were desperate to close as many cases as possible to give closure to the families. First, they wanted to track down the nameless victims of Tommy Lynn Sells. Their experience in Texas gave them a logical answer. If he confessed to one of these murders, contact that state's Central Missing Persons Office and link the victim to the crime. To their horror, they discovered that not every state had such an office. Even if they limited the search to a specific area and called the most likely county, it didn't always work. If a body was found just 100 feet on the wrong side of the county line, the agency contacted wouldn't know about it. Second, they wanted to notify all law enforcement agencies across the country about the serial killer in their possession. VICAP seemed like a simple solution, but it was far from ideal for a killer who operated like Sells. "It wants to put everyone in a category," Coy Smith said, frustration in his voice. Johnny Allen added, "And you're not going to get a hit if you don't do that." In other words, Smith explained, if you have a killer who slits all the women's throats with a 6-inch hunting knife, it's a chain, you get something out of it. But if you have a guy like Sells who goes out and beats this one up, slits this one's throat, and shoots this one, there's no connection, so you don't know anything. There seemed to be only one viable alternative to their problem: the national media. They would have no problem finding a willing media outlet. Their phones had been ringing with media calls since Sells's arrest, but they didn't want to do anything that might jeopardize the upcoming trial in Del Rio. So they decided to work with 48 Hours, the only group that agreed not to broadcast anything until after the trial. The long hours of confession, negotiation, and coordination took an emotional and physical toll on the Rangers. But soon, they had a break. It was showtime for Tommy Lynn Sells at the Val Verde County Courthouse. On August 22, 2000, jury selection began in the 63rd Precinct courtroom of the Val Verde Justice Center in Del Rio. The atmosphere in the courtroom was tense. The air seemed to crackle with anticipation. The court invited 500 county residents, more than twice the usual number, to serve as jury duty. The sheer number of potential jurors underscored the importance and complexity of the case. Thomas F. Lee, district attorney, entered the courtroom wearing the cloak of an anointed angel of justice. His bearing exuded determination and conviction. At his side was Assistant District Attorney Fred Hernandez, equally determined to bring the full wrath of the state to bear on Tommy Lynn Sells. The outcome of this case was of great importance to both men. Lee was running in an election for district judge. Hernandez was running for Lee's current job as district attorney. A death by lethal injection would secure them a political future. The tension of their personal ambitions mixed with the gravity of the case. Across the courtroom sat court-appointed defense attorney Victor Roberto Garcia, known to his friends as Bobby. Thinning gray hair framed a round face with warm, dark eyes, giving him the look of everyone's favorite uncle. Despite his friendly exterior, Garcia was a seasoned lawyer, ready to fight hard for his client. Sells entered the courtroom. The long hair, full beard, and tattered jeans he had worn when he was arrested were gone. In his blue suit, white shirt, and wire-rimmed glasses, he was well-groomed and looked more like a studious bookworm than a cold-blooded killer. The only clue that he was not what he seemed was a blue tattoo of a blooming rose on his neck, just above the edge of his shirt collar. The transformation was both remarkable and disturbing. The three lawyers questioned 120 members of the jury. In legal parlance, this body is called a venire. Every single member of the group is a venire member. The questioning was intense and often emotionally charged. Many were excluded because they were unwaveringly convinced of Sells' guilt, or because they felt that a life sentence was too lenient and that they would always sentence anyone convicted of murder to death. Others were sent home because they opposed the death penalty. Some were not seated because they believed that once you kill again. One juror was dismissed because he was not a U.S. citizen, and another because he was the defense attorney's brother-in-law. According to the defense team's notes, the first member of the jury felt that the death penalty was not being applied sufficiently or appropriately. His father, a drug trafficker, had been murdered in 1977. A bodyguard had killed him for drugs and money, but received only a 9-month sentence. The defense objected and was supported by the judge. The complexity of jury selection in a capital crime was evident here. Of potential juror number 6, the defense remarked, "That girl is high." Before the 17th candidate was questioned, the judge began a 9-minute lecture on special issues and other elements of the law. The monologue was not recorded by the court reporter. Throughout the lecture, the woman in the courtroom was attentive but did not look at the defendant. The defense accused her of inability to follow the law. She was dismissed. Any decision in this trial could have far-reaching consequences. While the 13th candidate was being questioned, damage control specialist Vince Gonzalez noted, "Tommy left a note saying he's starting to get mad. A lawyer from Uvalde is sitting in the gallery staring at Tommy." About this time, 9:57, Donna and Jessica came in. Tommy calmed down a bit. Donna Hughes was an employee of the aviation company that had come to the aid of the downed Texas Rangers and Tommy Lynn Sells in Oklahoma. She had kept in touch with Sells ever since, even buying his suits for the trial. The human connections Sells had maintained, despite his actions, were remarkable. The defense notes said that Juror 24 was an idiot who misunderstood the difference between probability and possibility, possibility being more likely than improbable. He was not the only potential juror confused on the issue. The complexity of the legal system and the difficulty of finding an impartial jury were becoming increasingly apparent. Number 37 claimed to be unemployed, but had given a work number on her questionnaire. She claimed to have learned a lot from unsolved mysteries, but swore she had no television and did not believe in cable television. The contradictions in the statements of the potential jurors were disturbing. Sells gave Gonzalez another message. "Look, I ruined my family. Mom, Tim, Jim, Randy. I don't think it's salvageable. God blessed me with another family, and I ruined that too. That's how I got into this mess." The words showed a rare moment of self-reflection from Sells, an admission of the far-reaching consequences of his actions. A mutual request was made to fire the venire member 40. He was an emergency room nurse who had treated Krystal Surles during their brief stop at Val Verde Medical Center. He was also the one who drew blood from Sells for tests after his arrest. His direct connection to the case made him unsuitable as a juror. Prospective juror number 42 seemed to have followed the case with unusual intensity. He also admitted to watching several episodes of The Faces of Death, a controversial video filled with images of actual deaths of real people. His fascination with death made him a questionable candidate for the jury. The state rejected member 46 because they believed Tommy Lynn Sells was incapable of committing the crime. The state's rejection was denied, but he was acquitted after a clear strike. The complexity of the selection process became increasingly clear. The defense wrote of potential juror number 77, "This woman is a neo-Nazi." They rejected her because they believed the defense needed to present evidence of her innocence. The rejection was granted. The variety of reasons for rejections was remarkable. At number 79, they wrote, Mormons, blood atonement. They accused him of belligerence and evasiveness, but the judge dismissed them. They had to use one of their peremptory strikes, the defense's only means of unilaterally disqualifying potential jurors. Sells wrote Garcia in his notebook, "You'll be a hated man before this is over." I was hated the day I took your case, but that's okay. I don't care. When they get in trouble, they want someone like me who isn't a nice guy, he replied. You're a nice guy. I've always liked you. Thanks, but I mean, they want someone who can fight in court and not back down. It's me I don't like, Sells wrote, a rare moment of self-awareness. I can't do anything about that, Garcia wrote back. The exchange demonstrated the complicated relationship between defense attorney and defendant. While potential juror number 105 was on the witness stand, Sells scribbled a note to Gonzalez. Low blow. The judge called Bobby a balloon-headed man. The tension in the courtroom was palpable. Every comment and gesture closely watched and interpreted. In a capital crime, jury selection is a high-stakes game. Inevitably, arguments arose. Garcia requested the opportunity to question all potential jurors about their stance on parole. He claimed that the jury had a right to know that if they gave Sells a life sentence, he would have to serve at least 40 years in prison before he could be paroled. Judge George Thurmond denied his request. The legal maneuvering began before the actual trial had even begun. Garcia raised this objection repeatedly throughout the proceedings. Sells sent Jessica a note that covered the front of 3 green Post-it notes. I'm scared. I'm not scared of this court. I'm scared I won't have you anymore. I know you keep telling me not to worry. I'm just scared. I'm about to go crazy. Do you want to come with me? I'll try calling you again tonight, between 7 and 9. I'm sorry I couldn't call until so late last night. But I tried. Are you trying to call the sheriff and see if we can have lunch in the jail at the same time? I love you. Bobby keeps trying to tell me I don't have to look at you or talk to you, because other people don't like that. I keep telling him, well, I love you, so I can't help it. Jessica's response covered the backs of the sheets Sells sent. She added another page that covered her front and back. The exchange showed the complicated emotional bond between Sells and Jessica, despite the horrific circumstances. Tommy, XOXOXOXO. Please believe me, you have nothing to worry about. I love you. I'll always be here for you no matter what. Just promise me you'll stick with me no matter what. It's all okay, baby. I promise. I'm just trying to be patient and wait for the Lord to do something or show me what He's going to do anything with your brother. Did you think he would hurt me? I know it's not jealousy. Ha ha. Ha ha. He doesn't even like me. Ha ha. But whatever. You don't have to worry. I love you. Your wife, Jessie. For 14 tedious days, the prosecution and defense repeated the same questions to one juror after another. The tension in the courtroom was palpable. Each potential juror was scrutinized. Finally, the 12 selected jurors and 2 alternates were appointed to the jury. The jury included Miriam Gonzalez, Hilda Loper, who worked for a justice of the peace office and a local law firm, James Jones, retired soldier, Navy and Air Force, William Cooper, a Taoist with 2 years of law school, Jay Hayden, Ada Victoria Gomez, whose husband was a police officer, Eleanor A. Stark, the oldest member of the jury at 71, and a retired U.S. Customs agent, Anna Regal, Mark Rivas, Dwight Brown, William Grady King, and Pedro Vidales, who at one point during questioning had said, "He who kills once will kill again." and claimed not to have understood the judge's question about independent evaluation of the evidence. By the time Vidales was seated, the defense had used up all of its peremptory dismissals. They asked the judge for more peremptory dismissals, but they were denied. The final jury makeup was set, and Tommy Lynn Sells' fate was now in their hands. After being sworn in, Sells stuck a pink post-it note in front of Garcia. "Should I take back everything I said?" was written on it. The question showed Sells' growing concern about how the trial was going. He then wrote Jessica a statement about himself. "Once upon a time there was a boy who grew up lost in this world. He never knew where to go. He never knew which way to turn. The boy became a man. Well, sort of. But he never knew where to go. And he's still lost to this world. He fell in love. Oh, how good his heart felt. How special she was to him. She always had a warm touch to offer him. But he was lost to this world. She gave and gave. He took and took. He tried his best to give back. But you can see he was lost to this world. He grew up, lean and mean." The words were a rare glimpse into Sells' self-perception, a mixture of self-pity and guilt. The trial was set to begin in a few days on September 12th and was expected to last 2 weeks. The tension in the courtroom was palpable as everyone involved prepared for the start of the proceedings that would decide the fate of Tommy Lynn Sells. The small town of Del Rio became a media mecca overnight. Traveling 160 miles west of San Antonio, many of the out-of-town journalists felt like they had arrived at the end of the world. The normally quiet town was suddenly in the national media spotlight. The reporters, cameras, and mobile studios surrounded the historic downtown building. Built in 1887, it is the only courthouse Val Verde County has ever had. Its venerable facade was in stark contrast to the modern broadcast trucks and satellite dishes that now lined the grounds. On the first day of the trial, the star of the show was not the man whose life or death was to be decided on the second floor of the courthouse. It was young survivor Krystal Surles. Cameras zoomed in to get a glimpse of the wrinkled scar that ran across her neck. She smiled and waved at the cameras as she entered the building. Her bravery and strength were palpable, despite the trauma she had endured. As the judge entered the courtroom, Sells wrote a note to his attorney. "September 12th, 2000. Trial begins. 9/2. They said we should look at the 12 when we get up. I feel pretty helpless. You have to do something." "Look at the person reading the indictment," Garcia replied. "When you answer, look at the jury." Assistant District Attorney Fred Hernandez stood to read the indictment. When Tommy Lynn Sells stood to answer, the audience greeted him with short gasps and drawn-out hisses. The tension in the room was palpable. Count 1 of the defendants. During the course of a burglary of a dwelling with intent to commit great bodily harm, did willfully commit murder by causing the death of a person, Kayleen Harris, by striking Kayleen Harris with a knife and cut her throat. How does the defendant plead guilty to this charge? Guilty or not guilty? The judge intoned. "Not guilty," Sells replied. His voice was calm, but the tension in his body was clearly visible. Count 2 was that he committed aggravated sexual assault and caused the death of Kayleen Harris. Again, he said, "Not guilty." Count 3 alleges that Tommy Lynn Sells, then and there, attempted to cause the death of a person, Krystal Surles, by cutting the throat of said Krystal Surles with a knife. This act was more than just a preparation, but did not result in the murder of Krystal Surles against the peace and dignity of the state. "And does the defendant plead guilty to this charge?" the judge asked. "Guilty," Sells said, to the surprise of the court and the audience. A murmur went through the courtroom. The defendant may take a seat. We are then ready to proceed with opening statements. Does the state wish to be heard? The judge asked. Yes, Your Honor. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. As most of you remember, my name is Freddie Hernandez, and I am the Assistant District Attorney. I believe most of you saw me during the individual voir dire proceedings. And sitting at the table is Mr. Tom Lee, the District Attorney, and we are here today for one reason: to see that justice is done. After explaining the purpose of his opening statement to the jury, he summarized the state's argument. You will hear evidence of this terrible case. You will hear how the defendant, Tommy Lynn Sells, knew the victim and her family. They will tell you how they knew Tommy Lynn Sells before December 31st, 1999, how they knew him, how they became friends with him. In fact, they had even bought a car from him at his place of employment. That's what they're going to testify about. They're going to take the stand and tell you that Tommy Sells, the defendant, was at their home several times and talked to both Harrises and also knew the children, including Kayleen. The Harrises will tell you where their home is outside the city limits of Del Rio, just past Amistad Lake, as you cross the bridge into Sanderson. It's a pretty remote area. It's dark, and the houses are far apart. They're going to tell you that if you want to go to their house, you're actually going to have to make an effort to get to it. You're not just going to drive by the house by accident. Hernandez went on to recount the events of the night of the crime, emphasizing Sells's prior knowledge of the family and the house. He described how Sells had learned of Terry Harris's departure for Kansas, which provided him with the opportunity for his attack. Most importantly, you'll hear from the brave little girl who will tell you how she survived the defendant's brutal attack. She will walk you through every single detail, step by step, of what she saw and heard in the early morning hours of December 31st, 1999. Hernandez ran through a list of other witnesses and their expected testimony. Texas Ranger John Allen, Val Verde County Sheriff's Department investigator Larry Pope, Bexar County pathologist Dr. Jan Garavaglia, and Dr. Cynthia Beamer, a San Antonio physician who had treated Krystal Surles. A DNA expert will be brought in, a serologist, who will tell you that the defendant's blood, along with Katie's blood, was found on his clothing. Another expert comparing fibers will tell you that his fibers were all over the victim's clothing, and that the victim's fibers were also all over his clothing, indicating contact. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a horrific crime, and at the end of the guilt-innocence trial, we will ask you to find the defendant, Tommy Lynn Sells, guilty of the capital crime of murder. Defense attorney Garcia began his opening statement by admitting, "This is a horrific case. It's a brutal case, and I told you that. You came here because all 12 of you said you could be fair, you were unbiased, and if you had any opinions, they would not affect your view of the case, and now you understand how critical it is." Tommy Lynn Sells came here today and pleaded guilty to the attempted murder of Krystal Surles. That's what he told you. That's the first step in taking responsibility for what was explained to you. The second part is that he is guilty of capital crime, pleaded not guilty. Then Garcia got to the heart of the defense. There was no evidence of a capital crime. There was no burglary. Nothing was stolen from the Harris home except the screens on 2 windows. There was no intent to commit sexual assault. In these confessions, which began on January the 2nd, he never said he intended to go to the Harris's trailer to commit aggravated sexual assault. That was never the case. You may hear statements that say, "I don't know why, but I wanted to." He will not deny that he was in that trailer. and he has not done that since day one. Garcia went on to explain that Sells did not admit to touching Kayleen's genitals until 5 days after his arrest, because he was told that confessing would result in the death penalty. And at that point, Tommy Lynn Sells wanted to die. Garcia concluded, "We are not shirking responsibility. We are not shirking what happened. Tommy Lynn Sells has taken responsibility for what he did, and I ask that you please keep an open mind on this part of the case. Thank you." As Garcia sat down, he received this note from his client. "The guy with the long hair next to the guy in the red shirt has a hole in his neck. Tracheotomy scar. It's surgery. He will sympathize with Krystal Surles," he replied. "You would have had fun if I hadn't talked," Sells noted. "Maybe I would have made you orgasm," was the reply. The first witness called by the prosecution was Noel Huchin, an employee of Larry's Lakeside Tavern. Her testimony was intended to shed light on Sells's behavior the night before the murder. Stay tuned to see how the trial carries on in next week's episode, Part 5, and the last part of our 5-piece documentary about the serial killer Tommy Lynn Sells. A new podcast episode airs every Wednesday at 6 p.m. Eastern.